Please welcome back our fantastic hosts from earlier on. We have Ellen Keane and Jessie Barr, joined now by Sinéad, Kane and Norah Casey.
Thank you, Jess. Yesterday was International Women's Day, and I think I'm just in awe of the women I'm sitting beside today. So, Sinéad Kane, you are a marathon runner and ultra runner as well, so welcome. And Norah Casey, the absolute genius businesswoman, so very welcome to have you. Norah, I just want to start off with you and ask, you've been obviously to a lot of the International Women's Day events. How have you seen it progress in the past few years?
I think I go back a little further. So it's 25 years since the Beijing Conference on Women, where Hillary Clinton said women's rights are human rights and human rights are women's rights. And as a young woman, I remember listening to that, and it was the first time anybody in my life had said something that resonated so strongly with me. So this year we're celebrating the 25 years. And if you look back on that, I'm reminded of the things that we're doing so much better than we did when I grew up. If you'd said what you want to be, I wouldn't have said a businesswoman. Never met one in my life. I grew up in the Phoenix Park. I think the woman who sold in the shops outside the gates was the closest thing to a businesswoman I'd ever seen. And a couple of years ago, they did a big study on the London Stock Exchange, and they discovered there were more people called Steve and David than women, actually, as directors of those businesses. And I still think now the Steves and the Davids, they can heave a big sigh of relief, because there's no chance we're overtaking them anytime soon. During the week, the World Economic Forum came out with some really sobering statistics. They said that in our lifetime, and in fact in your children's lifetime, you will not see gender parity, which was just horrifying for me. I always think when people give out to me for banging on about women all the time and why do you need that bloody International Women's Day, I remind them I have a son, and I'm actually helping them for their daughters, their granddaughters, their sisters, whoever's great for them in their life. But to imagine that actually none of us here, none of our daughters, and in fact, in terms of economic parity, in other words, earning the same as men, it'll be over 200 years. But the same report put Ireland as number 7. That's the only thing that I hold close to my heart. You know, we just had an election. We got one extra woman in politics, despite the fact we now have quotas. We have women for election doing sterling work. We're no further forward. We have lower participation of women in politics than sub-Saharan Africa. And when you talk about women in sports, you have to remember that it's also about having women in business sitting in boardrooms, women in positions of power, because they're the people often who will decide about sponsorship, about supporting women who are in sports. It's always, everything's interconnected in the fabric of our society. It's never one thing versus the other. The only great thing I feel is, for me, my whole life is about working with young women, 23 to 33. I've always said, when it comes to women, it's confidence, not competence. You can tell that by these amazing women. In fact, young girls come out of school, college, university, and they're overqualified than the boys. They're beating them at almost every metric. It's only when they go into the profession, into sports, into banking, into business, they realise that life isn't equal. I always say I grew up with a feminist, and my mother was great too, because my father sent me out into the world saying you can do anything, you can beat anybody. But unfortunately for us young women at 23 to 33, that's the key area for confidence. Young boys have a lot of bravado, they can beat the world, and young women, unfortunately, they feel a third less confidence. They don't want to ask for the salary, they don't want to ask for the job, they don't want to put themselves forward, they don't want to speak up in rooms. So, by the way, not saying anything about the age group here, but when you get to 40, equal confidence between men and women. And if you're over 50, women are more confident than men. That resonates with me hugely. So something's doing well and something's still to do.
Okay. Sinead, you are a marathon runner. Can I just ask how you decided that marathon running was your passion, and how did you get into it?
For me, it wasn't me who decided it. It was my run coach. He had the self-belief in me to see that I could progress into ultras from marathons. I decided to go back a bit in 2012. I did a 10K for Child Vision, National Education Centre for Blind and Visually Impaired Children. So that was in 2012. And then I did my first marathon in 2014, and that was for Childline. So a lot of my journey for running has stemmed from charity work and doing it for somebody, because I've been always brought up with the mantra and to give back to society. It's very important to give back. So I've always been doing work for the Irish Guide Dogs, NCBI, Able Vision Ireland, Child Vision, and that charity element has been always instilled into our family. So because I was never involved in sport as a child, was never involved in sport in primary school or secondary school, wasn't involved in it in my 20s. I was asked to do the 10K. I just turned 30. So, so for me, that's how I kind of got into marathon running. It was a progression from doing the 10K, seeing that, okay, I'd set myself a goal. I'd said to myself that I want to do it under an hour. And I did it in 55 minutes and I'd raised €2,000. So it was kind of that confidence boost, knowing, okay, set myself a goal, I achieved the goal, now I'll go on and do something else. So that's how I got into running.
And you have 2 Guinness World Records. How do you find sponsorship as a woman in sport? Do you struggle to get sponsorship or opportunities that maybe a man might have if he was in your position?
To be honest, I think sponsorship in general is difficult for any athlete to get. I'm so much fighting the disability barrier. I haven't even got to the gender barrier. Same. So for me, it's very difficult to answer questions on gender because all my life I'm fighting disability barriers. So to actually answer that question is quite difficult. But when I did the World Marathon Challenge, 7 marathons, 7 continents within 7 days, obviously I can't do that myself. I had to have a guide runner. So my guide runner was male, John O'Regan. So therefore, I'm not quite sure, were we finding it difficult to get sponsorship due to the gender because there was a male and a female. So I can't fully answer that question. But for me, what I did find was getting sponsorship or partnership or whatever word you want to use is very difficult. And I did get 2 sponsors come on board. We started out with the plan in January 2016 to get sponsorship. 2 sponsors came on board in the April, and then in June 2016, Brexit happened. Those 2 sponsors dropped us. And all of that summer then, I kept saying to myself, well, what's the point in training? What's the point? Very negative mindset. And that's really, really difficult to go out on a Sunday morning in the lashing rain when there's nobody at the trackside clapping, saying, come on, come on, come on, clapping you on when you're there by yourself, trying to motivate yourself and saying, I'm training for this goal, but I don't have sponsorship behind me. So what I learned from that was it's better to be prepared for an opportunity and not have one than to have an opportunity and not be prepared. So I kept preparing as if I did have the sponsorship. So that's a very long-winded way of answering your question that I didn't really answer.
That's okay. You kind of gave me a talking point for my next question. From a business point of view, Norah, what do you think that us female athletes can do to try and help get sponsorship or help raise awareness about our sport?
Really difficult question because, in fact, I always talk about it being interconnected because when I see women who rise up in places like Sodexo, Margaret Slattery's and others, they will always see empowering women and supporting women and promoting women as a priority. But unfortunately here in Ireland, we have a very low participation of women at that level, CEO, at levels of influence and power. So increasingly, I've been calling out, which I would encourage everyone to do, organisations who put women in sports in their CSR banner, which is disgraceful. Like they see it as something where they're making a contribution to society rather than helping to empower young women and women in sports. So I think being more vocal, you saw the impact that women in sports had when they came out and they spoke and they protested. I think as much as it's about jerseys or about working or about getting sponsorship, it's also about working with women collectively and creating those environments where, you know, we had our big Vital Voices event on Saturday, which was started by Hillary Clinton and Madeleine Albright. And we had young women from all walks of life, including rugby players, etc., mingling with women from the highest level in their organisations. That's how it happens, rather than women in sports sitting in a women in sports environment talking to each other. Do you understand? Creating platforms where I think you can interact with people, women and men, Just a word about
Making
men.
contact, yeah.
So everything I do is about working with men, so men and women working together. And, you know, the event that we ran on Saturday was equally men and women. The Taoiseach attended, the President, all he for she ambassadors with the UN. And I think if we don't work in solidarity with men and male allies, we'll never, ever achieve anything. When I bought the business first, somebody sent me a card. Now, it was funny, but not in a very good way. So it was a group of men around a table and a male chairman and one woman on the board. And I recognised that. And the caption underneath said, "That's a really important point, Mrs. Smith. We'll just wait for one of the men to make it before I take it seriously." So that had happened to me time and time again. But I'll tell you what it reminded me of. At that time, people were listening to men. They weren't listening to women. And on events like International Women's Day, we all sat in a room talking to each other, telling each other what we already knew. So for me, throwing the door open and saying, this isn't about a women's issue. This is a society issue. Men have children the same way as I have children. So for the whole of the rest of my life, I spent time trying to bring men on board, trying to use anything in my power. It should, of course, be just because it's equality. But you saw, I put a post up yesterday, which was a reminder to men that the reason that they are CEOs and chairmen, politicians, sports broadcasters, tax collectors, is because a woman who they call mum probably gave up her career, probably went through unequal pay, probably struggled to go back to work, for them to fulfill their dreams. And that shouldn't happen to any other woman. If a woman chooses to stay at home, that's her choice. If she chooses to work, it's her choice. If she chooses to invest in sports, that's her choice. So it's just a reminder to people everywhere that the reason you are who you are and the reason you can do what you do is probably the expense of a woman in the past.
Yeah. The 20 by 20 campaign has been ongoing now for, I think, over a year. And one of the things I love most about it is that it's not just women talking about women in sport. It is, they're getting men on board. I think yesterday I saw Brian O'Driscoll put up a pledge, which is really exciting. So how do we feel that people's perception of women in sport is changing the closer we get to maybe the Olympic Games?
Yeah, I think it's definitely improving. The 20 by 20 campaign really has brought it, like even small things like now, instead of it being when, you know, around Six Nations time that we're in at the moment, it's not just Aer Lingus and the male rugby players. There's now posters and it's a female, you know, female and male. And it's just normal rather than being, look, aren't we great? There's women on our poster. It's just the norm. And it's probably a bit controversial to say, but the term women in sport sometimes irks me a little bit because it should be just female athletes, male athletes, female athletes, rather than it being it's men, it's athletes, and then it's women in sport, and athletes are always considered the males. So why can't it just be male athletes, female athletes? You know, so I think even just in terms of the language we use around it could definitely be a little bit better, that it shouldn't be women in sport as if it's like women are in a domain that they're not meant to be in.
Do you think we should kind of remind our like male allies that it is the sport that we all love? So swimming, it is like a male swimmer should support a female swimmer because it's the sport. It's not just, oh, there's a male swimmer. Yeah, exactly. To try and help grow the sport.
Yeah, and I think, look, 20 by 20 has really brought attention to something that maybe a lot of people just didn't even realise was an issue.
Yeah.
You know, if you're not, unless you were originally, before this campaign came into play, if you weren't looking for female athletes, you didn't know that they weren't being represented. You know, if you were just flicking through the newspapers, you just saw the sports that you followed. And maybe until you were asked, when was the last time you saw a female athlete on the front page of the sports section, kind of go, God, I don't know, Katie Taylor maybe? You know, so it's like, maybe it's just made an issue that was always there actually known to more people. Yeah. Like, this is not a man versus women issue at all, because there's a lot of female athletes who are just as bad. You know, I was someone who probably didn't go to as many female sporting events as I should have, because a lot of the sports that I would have attended, both as an athlete and out of interest, were probably mixed, like swimming and like athletics and things like that. So male and female were just competing alongside each other. So that's what I became used to. And I wasn't involved in a sport where women are kind of separate until I started working in camogie and things like that. And I really realised how different it was. So I really kind of got behind the campaign. And I am seeing an improvement. There's still a long way to go.
And how comfortable are we all about actually calling it out when we see it? So recently, I think with the award season with sports in December, I noticed that I won't name the name, but a newspaper put out an article about the top female athletes, or success that has happened throughout the year, and there was not one single person with a disability in it, and I called it out. And I was quite proud that I was able to do that, and I kind of felt like it was my responsibility to do that. Do anyone here ever feel the need to do it, or have you ever faced backlash for doing it?
I get trolled repeatedly. So I have more people blocked on Twitter and in fact on LinkedIn, which is normally very, they're very kind of polite. They go after me big time, it doesn't bother me in the slightest. I don't know who they are. It's like walking into a room and somebody's talking. I don't want to listen to them. I just turn them off. I think the more often, I was putting up a post recently about the fact that I wish people put on gender specs. So I'll talk about the diversity issue in a second. But for me, it's impossible. I'm working with organisations, some of them not too far away here from Capital Dock, by the way, and they're amazing women. And then I open ads in the newspaper and there's 2 men looking out at me. Come and work with us. And there's 2 men, 3 men, maybe 4 men and 1 token woman. And I said, before you do any of that or do your annual report or take a big picture of a group of men in a boardroom, put on those gender specs and just have a look at it and see what it might look like from a woman's point of view. Because sometimes it's the insensitivity of not thinking about it. And the government is just as guilty. I mean, I'm usually the lone voice that goes out and talks about it. I ended up working with young travellers, and I work a lot with young women in the traveller community, in this weekend in particular. And I remember once meeting a woman. The reason I did it is I met this woman, Bridget from Galway, and she said, if you think it's hard being a woman in business, you want to try being a traveller woman in business. And it really resonated with me. So every time you talk about ability issues, myself and Joanna Reardon did an event the other day, and she said she turned up to report on that sports event, and they thought that she was the Make-A-Wish reporter. So she was talking very candidly about the kind of discrimination she faces, first and foremost for ability issues, and then as a woman. So it's a double layer. On top of everything else, it's a double layer. One thing that would help, organisations should remove gender from their diversity ethos, because we're half the population. We're not diverse. We're 50% of society. And women and men both deal with all of the other diversity issues, whether it's race, creed, ability, mental health issues, physical issues, whatever it is, that's something we all share, men and women. So I think that would help enormously if they focus their energies on that.
Yeah. Speaking of discrimination, Sinead, you faced some discrimination recently trying to qualify for, what was it again?
So last April I do 24-hour running.
Yeah, the 24-hour running.
As well as marathon running. So to anybody who tried to sit forward there to actually hear what I said, yes, 24-hour running. So to a lot of people that sounds mad. And to me, when I first started it, I didn't even know that type of a thing existed. But to get on the women's team in Ireland, you have to achieve the minimum. This is a minimum now. Say, for example, in America, it'd be 240 kilometres for the females. In Ireland, it's 200 kilometres for females. So you have to get 200 kilometres in 24 hours. I got that last April, expecting to see my name on the Athletics Ireland website last July or last August when the selection was there, because only, was it 2 or 3 other females only had the qualification at the time, and my name wasn't there. Questioned it, a lot of back and forth with different people, and then come September, then the IAU, this is the International Association of Ultra Running, their attitude was, no, you can't compete because for you to use a guide runner would be an unfair advantage to fully sighted runners. And I said to them then, okay, I have the solution. So if it's an unfair advantage, let all the fully sighted runners wear blindfolds, and then they'll know how it's like for me. If it's that much of an unfair, and I said to them, you will have no takers for that. So there is no unfair advantage. But yet still, they still felt it was an unfair advantage. And so they said if I used, because it was breaking the IAAF rule, which says that no athlete can have any assistance. And my guide runner was being deemed as assistance. So if I used a guide runner, my results weren't going to be counted. So therefore, Athletics Ireland didn't want to select me, because if my results weren't going to be counted as part of the team, then I was bringing no value to the team. So anyway, very, very long story short, basically I had to keep fighting, and they Irish team were flying out on the Thursday morning, and the IAU were given until 5 p.m. on the Wednesday to make up a decision. They emailed my solicitor at 4:59 on the Wednesday, so to say, okay, we'll let her in, and it was more deemed as an exception to let me in. So if I want to go to the Europeans this year, I'm hoping that I do not have to go through all this crap again. But basically, I wasn't going to give up. Like, for me, it was either let me in or nobody's going to this event. And I mean nobody, no athletes. And for me, that was very fearful, because I was like, any athlete, any runner, no matter what your level, whether you're recreational or whether you're high level elite, if you're training for something, whether you're training for parkrun or you're training for the Olympics, you're going to be upset if you put a lot of hard work into something and then an event is cancelled. So people would have sympathised with me, but they kind of probably would have been saying in the back of their head, oh, well, because of her now the event is cancelled, and I've spent the last 2 years or the last 4 years training for this World Championship. So it kind of takes courage for that. On the Thursday morning, as I was flying out, a court in Monaco said that I had been, that the organisation had breached Article 14 of the ECHR, which is the European Convention of Human Rights. So I couldn't have gotten to that point without all the various solicitors behind me, my solicitors in Ireland, my solicitors in France, Richard Donovan, my run coach, everybody kind of helping me and supporting me. And that event actually really, really brought me to a very low point where I actually hated running. I didn't want to be involved in running. A lot of people say to me, oh, you're a role model in running. And at that time, I no longer wanted to be the role model, because for me, it does get to a point where it's very tiring to always be the one trying to break down the barrier. Sometimes you just want to, I just wanted last year to be on the list and just that. So that wasn't the only court case I've taken. I also had to take a court case when I was 17 against my school, and I won that case as well.
But you should be proud, because if we don't stand up for things that are wrong, then people are just gonna keep getting away with it.
I wasn't doing it just for myself.
Yeah, that's what I meant.
I'm doing it. I'm hoping that I was the first athlete, whether male or female, to get into a 24-hour World Championship with a disability. So I'm hoping that other people can come along behind me, so that this whole thing, that they don't have to go through a court case to be deemed having a guide runner assistance, when it's just totally common sense really shows that it's not assistance as in help. Like, no matter how fast my guide runner wants me to run, I can only go to a certain...
as fast as you can, Well, you should be really proud of yourself for standing up. So well done.
Thanks.
One thing I wanted to ask is, how do we feel about, as Jessie was saying earlier, when it came to the Olympics, she found it hard to kind of be proud of herself for being part of the 4x400. How do we feel about celebrating our success as women? Do we tone it down a little bit, or do we go all out? I can see Norah smiling at me. She definitely has lavish parties.
Because I was lucky enough to give you an award, and Jess Kelly, and I always think, no more than I say, if you don't see it, you can't be it. You know, here are these inspirational role models. I mean, the story that Sinead just told is just incredible, like unbelievable that she had to go through all of that so that young women coming after her, you know, she's paving the way for people in many ways. And I always say that about women, is that they step up and for the most part they reach down and try and help somebody else come up behind them. And it's an exhausting job. I mean, it really is, because sometimes very lonely paths to take. So all the years since 2000 that I've been given women awards, and I'm talking about the most senior women in politics and public life, global women, women in sports like these women, they'll get up on stage and say, it wasn't me. It was my coach, it was my team, and look, they're sitting there at the table and they should be getting this award, not me. Constantly referencing everybody around them rather than saying, thank you, it's all about me. Now, forgive me for saying this. I've also sat in rooms where men have stood up and taken an award off the back of some of the work that women in their team have done, and happily stood up and said, thank you so much, I deserve this, and it's just great, that you finally recognised how brilliant I am. So I do think that women hide their light under a bushel, definitely.
Do you think we should celebrate our successes a little bit more?
Well, you are. Today you're celebrating your success. And the more often you do that, the more often young women listening to the radio or looking at your photographs or seeing your tweets go out, they say, wow, I can do that. I can see you can do it. And you've got all the adversity and challenges you've overcome in your life. And, you're great inspirational role models for women everywhere.
Thank you. Jess, just to go to the topic of mental health at the moment, because it's an ongoing topic, what do you think we need to do to make sure that we're looking after our mental health as women? Because I think we kind of get a lot of things to do, and we tend to, because we're such caring people, we tend to kind of forget about ourselves a lot. So what do you think we need to do to make sure that we look after number one as well as number two, number three, number four?
I suppose it's just that, looking after you first. Like if you use like the metaphor of putting your own mask on first. And I think for a lot of women, there is so many other people to care for. Like I'm not a mother yet, but I'm looking after a partner who's studying to do medical exams at the moment. So I kind of already feel now I know what it's going to be like when I have a baby. But
you'll have two.
But there's always going to be someone else to put first. And I suppose when you think about it, and I suppose again, back to kind of the language we use, and we kind of hear mental health and we get kind of scared of it because you hear mental health and you think mental illness. And it's like, oh, I don't need to look after my mental health because I feel fine. And I suppose if you think, instead of thinking of as mental health and mental illness, is looking after your well-being. So how well do I feel? And it's this idea, so there's kind of different, like we've always looked at it as this, I'm either mentally ill or mentally healthy. Actually, you could look at it as, is my well-being flourishing or am I languishing? So how's my well-being, which is your kind of day-to-day check-ins. So I think looking after that first, because if you look after that before it gets to a stage where you need to be looking after your mental health, then it's not as scary to think of it like that.
Do you think it should be a non-negotiable that every day we just check in with ourselves to make sure that we're doing something to look after our happiness?
Yeah, and it's whether it's exercise, it's just doing something that you enjoy. I know, everyone knows exercise is good for my mental health, but I hate exercise. Well, then don't do it. Do you enjoy cooking? Do you enjoy going for a coffee with a friend? It's just doing something every day that makes you feel better. Okay, exercise is a proven one, but if that actually brings you out in hives thinking about it, going into a gym or exercising, find another way. For me, it was walking my dog. Such a simple thing. And
so yours is walking your dog?
Mine is walking my dog.
Norah,
it was kind of like a mindfulness thing.
So I did an exercise towards the end of last year where somebody asked me to tick boxes. So, it was all kind of doing well in business, doing well as a woman. My house, I just love my house. It's small, but I do. So, and then on the other side, it was like love life, time off, hobbies, and there was 0, 0, 0. And I admitted, I used to make up hobbies because I didn't have any, So I was always kind of working, and people would say, what's your hobby? I'd say, I like going fishing, of all things. I remember going fishing once as a child, so I think the whole world thinks. I started getting offers to go with the gillies down in the lakes and in the Midlands. So now, what can I say? I was a single mum for the last, X number of years since Richard passed away, and I guess in my life I don't see work-life balance as an issue. I seamlessly go for it. And it doesn't normally stress me. But I think exactly what you've just said, Jessie. So since the beginning of the year, I've been trying to sort of say to myself, take a little bit of time to yourself every day. I like walking. So I go off on my own, but my podcast and listen. And maybe I don't do that daily check-in, but I am trying really hard
you need to get better.
I definitely need to get better.
And Sinead, what is yours?
For me, say, being around the house and just having on a spoon-fed TV program where you don't actually have to think about what's happening in it, something like that.
It literally allows you to switch off.
So something like that, or just then at the weekends, maybe going out into nature and being out in the quietness of the nature and just taking that, the fresh air in.
That's lovely. Well, thank you very much. We're going to go to the audience now. Jess, is there any questions for our panel?
There's not, but what we have is a huge round of applause for our panel. Thank you so much. Please put your hands together. What you've been listening to for the last little hour or so is Ellen Keane, Jessie Barr, Sinead Kane and Norah Casey. This has been Off the Ball Live at Capital Dock. A huge thank you to everyone who's hosted us. The team who put the food together, thank you so much. A quick reminder that this is Ireland's tallest building with incredible 360 views of Dublin. This is your final chance to go in and get a selfie with the spire or any of those different landmarks you want to take. But thank you so much, and thanks again to our brilliant panel. Thank you very much.